It gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce Dr. Wanda Costen. She is Dean of the School of Business for MacEwan University. And having spent some good quality time together, I can share that she's a wonderful conversationalist with a great sense of humor and a person who's strong in her faith. Dr. Costen earned her PhD from Washington State University and an executive MBA from Pepperdine University. She completed her undergraduate degree at the United States Military Academy at West Point. She has served as a Fulbright Scholar with the University of the West Indies, Mona, in Kingston, Jamaica. In her role, she brings expertise in multiple areas, including strategy, human resources, organizational behavior, law, and diversity. Her research interests encompass racial and gender inequality in organizations, women and leadership, strategic human resources, managing diversity and ethnic minority student experiences. In her work, she strives to reimagine how to prepare students for work and purpose in the 21st century. She strategizes with civic and business leaders and campus stakeholders, faculty, staff, students, and alumni. She works with a collaborative approach, bringing her experiences from the military, private industry, and higher education in the United States and Canada. Family-wise, she's the mother of a 23-year-old son. She calls herself an Army brat with family all over. Let's give her a wave and a warm Rotary welcome, Dr. Wanda Costen.
Good morning. Trying to share my screen here now. There we go. So I trust that y'all can hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep.
So I must say, I was a bit taken aback by the way y'all approached this, so that was kind of cool. I must acknowledge that I'm always surprised. Sometimes Canadians are far too, I wouldn't use the word kind, but unassuming, right? So I'm singing "Oh Canada" and half of y'all are not. So how is that possible? I'm a US citizen. Good Lord. Have a little pride, people. So good morning. It's way too early for me. So hopefully this will go okay. And it should, because I'm just talking about myself. So if I can't speak on that topic, God help me. So I'm going to talk a bit about who I am and why I'm here, because it struck me that that's what Alan said I should do. Is like, well, what gets you up in the morning? Well, my alarm clock. But short of that, these are some of the things that I care about. So first and foremost, who am I? Clearly you figured out I'm a US citizen, and so by that I always apologize to Canadians, because that means I'm rather straightforward. And y'all would say brash and in your face. I would say, no, I'm honest. So, but hey, I get it, right? I am an Army brat, so it's not that I call myself that I am an Army brat. And what that means, brats are people who grew up in the military, and we don't really have a home. So that's literally my least favorite question to answer is, where are you from? The United States. I don't really have much more than that to say. I actually grew up mostly in Europe, Germany, through my developmental years. So I have a very different approach to life. My brothers and I like to say that we're not arrogant Americans. So that should be a positive for y'all. Values. I hold several values very dear. The first two are honor and integrity. Those were solidified at the academy. When you grow up in the military, you have a deep sense of responsibility. I'm the eldest and the only, as I like to say, and I really am a firstborn, like for real. And so over the top achiever and striving to do well. And as those of you who are firstborns know, your parents actually treat you like adults very early in life, so you have this sense of responsibility. I would say another key value of mine related to integrity is this notion of doing what I say I'm going to do. I have to share with you, I have a very different view of that now because I'm in a leadership course, and the basis of it is honoring your word. right? So most of us can say, well, yeah, I do what I say I'm going to do. But the part that's really blown my mind, where I literally said WTF over, is this notion that we're also accountable for what other people's expectations are of us, even if they don't tell us what they are. Think about that for a minute as a leader, that there are people, particularly in Canada, if I may be so bold, you all are not very direct, and yet you expect people to know what you want. In my role at the university, in school council, which is part of a governance matter, which you all are probably quite familiar with, we reach consensus, and I often make them vote so that they can say, I had a voice. And it's shocking to me that after that, a week or two later, someone will come to me and say, people aren't really happy with that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? We had a full discussion about it. Y'all voted on it. It passed unanimously. And now you're going to tell me you're not happy. How can that be? Right? But it is, because you all don't say anything. You just expect someone to know what you're thinking, I guess. I don't know how I'm supposed to do that. And so this notion that being in integrity and honoring one's word is actually also means I'm responsible for delivering on expectations of me that I'm unaware of. And that just blew my mind. So that's a learning that I'm working through right now and trying to figure out, what does that mean for me and how does that work? Next is this notion of influencer. So obviously we're born, and I grew up in a family, a working class family. I'm the first person in my family to go to university. And I'll apologize again, in the US we use the terms college and university interchangeably. They're not distinct like they are here in Canada. What Canadians call a college, what Canadians call a college is what we would call a community college. And I know a community college in Canada is something completely different as well. So just so you know that. So these are the key influencers in my life, and these are the institutions at which I've had the luxury of attending and earning degrees. The first of which you see there is West Point. I don't know if everyone knows what West Point is, but in my mind, it would be the most prestigious military institution in the world. And I would challenge anyone to tell me that it's not, but feel free. Our motto is duty, honor, country, and we take that very seriously. And I always point this out. I'm embarrassed to share that a lot of the key leaders in the United States right now happen to be my literal classmates. So Mike Pompeo, God help us, I pray for him every day, is my classmate. Mark Esper, Secretary of Defense, is my classmate. So I often want to reach out to them and say, have you forgotten our motto? Country is last, and it's last for a reason, right? We have a duty and responsibility to humanity and each other. We have to speak and honor who we are and what we say. And country is last, it's not first. So what are we doing and how do we do it? Those things are important. The second is Pepperdine, and that's in beautiful Malibu, California. I remember when I got there, I remember thinking, this is why it's so expensive. Look at the landscaping. It's gorgeous. I didn't know at the time that I applied, but it is a religious institution. And you'll see hopefully in that logo, it says freely received, freely give. And it's just this notion of giving back and caring about your community, making a difference. So that had a very positive impact on me. And then last but not least is Washington State. The Cougars, many of y'all might know that. It's in eastern Washington, Pullman, Washington, about an hour and a half east of Spokane, which is where Gonzaga is. That's where my brother went to school. And what was unique about that is it's a land-grant institution. And a land-grant institution in the United States is designed to educate the citizens of the state. And it's in a rural community. So that's where I learned the importance of, these are farm kids, right, with this really great work ethic. And that's where I learned the importance of educating citizens. Like, everyone has a right to an education and how it can transform lives. That's really what's important there. So those three institutions, as I've matured in life, have had a huge influence on what I do and how I do what I do, and why I eventually wound up in post-secondary. This is my third career. So I was in the military. I was a military police officer. And then I spent about a decade in industry, sales, operations, human resources. And then I pursued my PhD in my mid-30s. And I've been in post-secondary ever since. So that's really what has shaped who I am and what I do today. When I was in Pepperdine getting my executive MBA, at the end, we were asked by one of the faculty, now what? What are you going to do with this new knowledge? And I read a book called The Path. It's actually, look at props. I read a book called The Path, and it's right here on my bookshelf. And The Path was written by a woman by the name of Lori Beth Jones. And she's a very successful consultant down in San Diego. And what she was doing is she helps businesses stay on track, develop strategies, mission statements, et cetera. And what she realized is many of us are floundering. And what would it be like if maybe humans, individuals, created their own mission statement? So the whole book is how to do that. And what I do this actually with my students when I used to teach, particularly in the capstone, because I said, if you treated your mission statement as this is what I'm here to do, and if every time you had to make a tough decision, you weighed it against your mission statement, you'd be on course most of the time. So this is the mission statement. There's a whole process to do it. So this is the mission statement I created back then, and try to live to it. So this notion of love and enthusiasm, most people would characterize me as an off-the-chart extrovert, very, very difficult for me to stay quiet. But this notion of passion, honesty, and integrity, you'll see honesty and integrity there again. Most people are very quick to identify, I'm really passionate about life and the things I believe in, and I work really hard to have a positive impact on other people and help other people develop. That's the real reason why I'm a faculty member. And even as a leader, my goal is to help my direct reports develop into leaders themselves and to have a positive impact wherever they are in their community, in the institution in which they work, etc. So now on to the really juicy stuff. Why am I here? So I'm always asked, especially by people in Edmonton, how the heck did we get you to Edmonton? Well, first of all, who knew where Edmonton was? And if I'd have known it was this cold, I might not be here. But who knew, right? So this notion that it's Canada. I came under the auspices of our current occupant in the White House, and well, who wouldn't want to leave the country? And while many of my friends and colleagues were surprised, I'm like, it's Canada. Like, it's literally connected to the United States. It's just north. It's not the other end of the world. Again, it is brutally cold up here, though. I'm also here because MacEwan, I came for the job, just to be honest. MacEwan has an intentional focus on teaching, and I'm very passionate about teaching. I'm also interested in the student body that it happens to serve. This notion that you can start here and get a diploma and then ladder into a degree gives access to people who normally don't have that kind of access to higher education. And while education isn't the panacea we thought it was, it certainly goes a long way in reducing the inequality in society. So that's really why I came to MacEwan. I thought I'd have the opportunity to have a positive impact to help the institution grow and develop, particularly in downtown Edmonton. Now, here's the caveat. One doesn't know what one doesn't know. So I have to say I've had this conversation with my colleagues on campus, which is, you know, in a way, MacEwan was not forthcoming. They were not really honoring their word when they were recruiting me. They took advantage of the fact that a U.S. citizen would not understand what it means to say, oh, this institution evolved from a college to a university. So what happened is I arrived and recognized that actually in my unit, the School of Business, probably half of the faculty are legacy faculty. So they built MacEwan, right? But that also means that they're attached to the past. And so a lot of the practices and processes and procedures we were engaged in were those of a college, not a university. And so I was quite taken aback by that, and I didn't understand it. So this notion, but my first 6 months, my favorite line was, you do realize that's not how universities operate, right? And then when we got moved into the first part of the PSLA, Post-Secondary Learning Act, I got to say, well, we're doing this because it's how a university operates. We're legislated to be a university. We must operate like a university. That also has to do with how I'm treated here in Canada, which as an African-American woman is certainly better than I am in my home country. But I've had many peers and particularly particular mentors, very successful here in Edmonton who has been kind enough to take me under his wing, who reminds me regularly that many Canadians, and especially Edmontonians, really don't like Americans. So some of what I fight isn't just that I happen to present differently and be direct and straightforward and perhaps too much confidence, God help me, but it's also that they just don't like Americans, and that's not something I would have thought to find. And even learning to adjust to a different culture that is not as straightforward, right? Where I have to dig to actually understand what people mean and say and those kinds of things. So now what? Now that I know that, now that I've been here 2.5 years, I have 2.5 years left in my contract. Now it's about me adjusting. I shared with Lynn because she asked me about my hobbies, and I just laughed because unfortunately, I'm working in Edmonton. I'm not living in Edmonton. I work way too much. I don't have quality of life. And I'm an empty nester, so now I can let all kinds of work fill up my day as opposed to what do I want to do and how do I leverage my amazing experience here in Canada. I actually love Canada despite the cold. I know you're tired of me talking about the cold, but you really have no idea how cold it is up here because you're Canadians. It's freezing up here. Do you realize in other parts of the world in North America, it's quite warm right now. And I know y'all think yesterday was hot, but it really wasn't, right? 22 to 25 is not that hot, but I know y'all think it is. But now what? So my real goal over the next 2.5 years is to identify 3 key areas that I'm focused on in the school and stay focused on that. And then to actually get immersed in the community, to figure out how I can add value here in Edmonton. And given what's happening right now, lots of people have reached out to me to see how I can help with some of that, right? So that's where I'm heading now. So I'll leave you with that and open the floor for questions. I'm sure you have some. And I didn't want to take up a lot of time just talking. So there you have it.
So Wanda, do you want questions sort of shouted out at random, or do you want them on the chat function?
Sure. Either way, I'm going to stop screen sharing. So that should give me a little bit more access now to the chat.
Okay.
And,
Wanda, I have a question. It's Lynn.
Sure.
Just being an American, and you've got some great observations about Canadians there. Can you tell us your perspective on the U.S.? Any hope for the future? What do you see about what's happening in the U.S.?
Well, Canadians are shocked by this, which shocks me, but racism is everywhere. Racism doesn't stop at some imaginary line in the road in the land called, a border. And as cocky as many of my Canadian friends have been, y'all have racism too, by the way. And in fact, I've been told that the way U.S. citizens are treated in the U.S., or African Americans are treated in the U.S., is the way Indigenous people are treated in Canada. So that's a wake-up call, eh? But I would say, look at there, eh? So I would say I do have hope, but the hope is grounded in voting, right? So we're in the situation we are in primarily because young people were so frustrated that Bernie wasn't the candidate of choice. And they didn't understand that we're a republic, we're not a democracy. So you have to vote. And if you don't vote, you're gonna be in trouble. And so the key is to, one, make sure citizens are registered to vote, and then to get out the vote. Because I think it's very clear that even those people who, not all clearly, but lots of people who voted for him in the beginning won't vote for him again. Despite the fact they may not like Joe Biden, you got 2 options in the United States. We don't have the luxury of 4 or 5 options like in Canada. You have 2 options. Which one of those are most aligned with your view of the world is how you have to vote. In terms of the current situation, I was on Facebook last night, and I have to tell you the number, and I apologize if this is offensive to folks, but the number of European Americans or white folks who just don't get it blows my mind. The excuses they come up with is just mind-boggling. And what that means is we can't fix it. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 didn't pass because brown people were in Congress. We weren't. It was white people who saw through media what was happening to brown-skinned people, their fellow citizens, that created that change. And so it has to happen again. But if people are unwilling to acknowledge that this is a long-time systemic part of everyday life for anyone who does not present as white, we're not going to get there. It's that simple. I'll give you one example. So I'm sure you all saw this because I watch Lisa LaFlamme. I love Lisa LaFlamme. So that's the news I watch. And several weeks ago, they had all this video footage of European Americans protesting with weapons, some of which were assault weapons. Yet no one thought they needed to even call the National Guard, let alone the active duty United States military. And yet, brown people, African Americans who protest with no weapons, even if they loot, somehow requires National Guard and the United States Army. Think about that. There's no way that should have happened. That's racism, and it's systemic. And I think we have to figure out how to get to that. But it starts with conversation. And I think in general, European Americans and folks who present as white are afraid to have the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Wanda, do you see any link to your role for the School of Business and the future of business and our youth, and what's the role of the education institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical, right? Now, I have to tell you, the government, as you all know, has really imposed some really difficult budgetary constraints on us, right? Thankfully, they lifted the one that made no sense yesterday, at least for a year. But I have to tell you, I don't begrudge the government doing what they're doing in terms of accountability. When I arrived, I said, you know what? We have financial and fiduciary responsibility to three different constituents, the first of which is the government of Alberta. In Canada, the government tends to fund 40 to 50% of what you need. In the United States, it's 20 to 22%. That's it, right? The second is taxpayers, of which I am one, right? And trust me, y'all tax a lot. And then third is the students and their families. So we owe a responsibility to them that says, how are we spending your money? What are we investing in? And it should all be to the betterment of the education of those students. It doesn't mean that every single dollar goes to the student, but it enhances the faculty to help them deliver the learning experience, to help them prepare. I say we're providers of talent, right? So what that means for us is we have to make sure that our students have the kinds of experiences that allow them to be successful in any endeavor. It doesn't matter to me if it's government, for-profit, not-for-profit, doesn't matter. And in that, particularly in Canada, which has so many immigrants, it's how do I deal with and work with others who are not like me, who have different perspectives of the world, worldviews, who have different value structures, who might have a different religion or no religion. You know, Canada's a lot more like Europe that way. It's not as, and so we in post-secondary have to work on what kinds of experiences do we need to ensure that our students have so that they're successful, right? That's what we have to focus on. And that means making them uncomfortable and then letting them go out and be institutions of change individually.
Good morning, Wanda. It's Myron here. How are you doing?
Hey, Myron. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you. I just wanted to ask a little bit on the education side, if I may. With COVID, sounds like MacEwan, the majority of the online classes starting in the fall. I mean, a lot of negative things with COVID, but I think there's some positive things. I'm just curious if you could share us an update around that, please.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're figuring out that we can do a lot of things that we've had the luxury of being able to do, but just didn't take advantage of, right? So this meeting is one. You actually don't have to physically leave your home to have a quality meeting. And I think we're paying a bit more attention to what's important. The shift to online is quite different. It's a completely different pedagogy, right? But I would say the value of that is when we come back, I think it will force faculty to think about if people are actually going to come to the classroom, what are they going to get? Because many faculty, not all, and thankfully not in my unit, I would like to believe, but some faculty actually have folks come to campus and they're just regurgitating what they read in the book, right? Well, that's not adding value to anyone. The key is, if I'm going to come into the classroom, what are you going to share with me that adds value, that helps me be better prepared? How are you going to challenge my way of thinking? I had a mentor once who said to me, you know, Wanda, if you're not challenging your students, you're actually not doing your job. That's what it means to learn, right? To be uncomfortable. So I used to warn my students that if you leave each class session comfortable, like, oh, I got that, I didn't do my job. But we as humans aren't comfortable with that. So I think it's actually going to build our resilience by having to learn in new and different ways and figure out, how do we engage with students? How do we get them engaging with the materials? And how do we do that in this kind of environment? But it can be done, right? And then I think the budget cuts have, of course, had a huge impact on us in terms of what kind of support systems and resources do we have at our disposal. I do think the government has to be a bit careful. They've made some decisions, in my personal opinion, that would lead one to believe they don't understand fully post-secondary and what we're trying to do, right? So I think they're right to ask difficult questions and say, help us understand how these funds are being used to add value to students. But just a blanket cut, McEwen was cut 7.9%, the greatest cut in the entire province. That was ridiculous. That resulted in a 17 million in-year retro cut. Think about that in your own families. You could not do that. You just couldn't do it. So I think they have to be a little bit more specific. The metrics I'm quite used to coming from the United States. We have a lot of metrics. One of the most important should be time to degree, right? And are they learning the appropriate competencies that prepare them for the real world? I'm an advocate for work integrated learning. So COVID has challenged that, because it's difficult for people to actually get out into the work experience and learn the world of work. But we're doing some of those things electronically as well. Like, I work from home typically Mondays and Fridays, and I'm on campus Tuesday through Thursday. I have to go in this afternoon for a major meeting. But again, it's us saying what's important and important enough for us to meet face to face, right? So that we get this done right. Thanks, Meyer.
Wanda, business. What's the difference, the biggest difference in the culture between Canada and the US? And with regard to our own culture, will we survive when we get back to regular living?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. This is surprising to me, but because of my engagement with a lot of different business people, I actually find that the business aspect, business leaders are also direct, right? So I think that it may be different in nonprofit, but the more economically oriented the business is, the more direct they are, because they don't have as much time to play games and figure out, what did you really mean by that? And so I think, so for example, Myron's field of finance, banking, you really can't afford not to be direct, because you're making decisions that impacts people's lives and investments. So that tends to be the same. I think Canada, rightly so, as part of the Crown, really spends a bit more time than we do in the US trying to reach consensus. I'm an advocate for consensus. I hate compromise. When someone says I have to compromise, I feel like I lost something. Consensus is getting together and saying, what can we live with? Are we all in agreement that this is how we're going to move forward? And I actually like that approach. I think equally so, the sense of accountability, right? We say we want accountability, but really we don't, because that means that someone's actually going to say to you, you know, you didn't do your job right there, right? That's uncomfortable. So I think another key difference is Canadians are a bit uncomfortable with that directness, right? Of course we're going to survive. We're resilient, right? Humans are resilient. Businesses are resilient. I think there's going to be a fundamental shift in how we do business is going to change, right? So I participate in a, I think it's bi-monthly now, meeting of business leaders from across Alberta and sometimes across Canada. And the first time I participated, it was merely because I liked the name of the conference. And it literally was called the WTF Unconference, right? I was like, well, I have to participate in that, just see what it is. Well, it's phenomenal. And it's about all these progressive, entrepreneurial, now we're using a term called exponential thinking, because the notion of change is like this now. We're used to this. It's exponential, the change. And what COVID has done is say, here's an example of how exponential it is. And some of the people on that call are business owners, like they own their own law firm or accounting firm or small business enterprise. And I find it funny, but one guy had just signed a lease for downtown Edmonton and said, well, now I'm frustrated with myself because I probably need a third less space, right? Because at first people were all upset about working from home, and now they realize, like, I could have been doing this the whole time and saving gas and not needing to deal with traffic. And let's remember what's happening with the environment. I am not an environmentalist like most, the whole beat the wall down. I do recycle and those things, and I love nature, so I get it. But when you look at how different the world is today, how do you not say this is the right thing, right? So I just believe we're going to be a little bit more intentional about how we do business and what's important to us and how we engage with other people. That's what I think is going to change. What's important.
Wanda, one of the things that has come up of late in my world is people charging for a service that used to be done in a room or in a facility. That service is now being done remotely. And one of the challenges that come along with that is, what do you actually charge for that service that's being done remotely versus in face-to-face scenarios? And there's been a whole bunch of them who have done it for free, which means when we come back to the new or the old world and back to normal, and you do have to pay again, what does that actually say about what you are paying for and what service you actually have to pay for? And I'm wondering, in your world, has that come up? Because the issue that I see there is, if you're giving your actual service for free or a virtually free, and then you go back to a in-studio platform and you charge full rate, then really you're not paying for the service provided and the technical expertise that comes along with that service. What you're saying to your clients is, you're paying for the brick and mortar building, and the service that we're actually going to give you has no value because we just gave it to you for free for 3 months or 4 months or whatever the time frame is. Has that come up in your world at all yet? Or if I could get your thoughts on that, that'd be great, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. And I don't know what world you're in, but you said studio, so I can kind of think about that. Of course it has. You've seen it all over, right? Students talking about, oh, we shouldn't have to pay the same amount because it's online. What planet are you on? It's education. Yes. The value, it's what you're talking about, Ian, is the need for individual businesses to determine their value proposition. Yes. What is it that you're really offering? And that's what you're paying for. You're not paying for the mode of delivery. You're paying for what's being offered. And that's what I mean in the university setting or colleges, post-secondary in general. And I would argue even in secondary, the key needs to be, what are you delivering? And how does that add value? That's what you're paying for, not the mode of delivery. And I would challenge you on one other thing. There is no normal. Again, we're not going back. People need to understand that. And I think it's the piece people don't get. We will not be going back to the way things were. And people like to use this thing called new normal. That in itself is problematic because we have it. That means we're not learning what we're supposed to learn from COVID. There is no normal. The change is so monumental, and the need to adapt is so critical that if you try to tell yourself, well, this is how I'm going to settle in again, the minute you settle in, you're losing, right? So how do you create this sense of ongoing evolution? It doesn't have to be transformational change, but it must be incremental change all the time. How am I getting better? Because it's the comfort that gets us in trouble. That's when you get, I'm old enough. There are a lot of organizations that don't exist anymore, right? Pan Am. Some of y'all don't even know what that is. Kodak was it, right? There's no Kodak, right? And so we have to be constantly evolving. But I challenge people to think about not what the new normal is, but how will we engage with each other moving forward? And how do we make sure that when I have that face-to-face engagement, which now we value more than ever, now we get how important that is. How am I going to use that time? I mean, I think all of you have been in meetings where you're like, why the hell am I sitting here? There's nothing happening, and it's worse than post-secondary. I mean, analysis paralysis. Make a damn decision and move on. Even if it's wrong, so what? Make a decision, pivot, and keep going. I'm fortunate in business. We're not trying to find a cure for cancer or a cure for COVID. We're making very basic decisions, folks. Make them. And how do you teach your students, who are the future leaders of the country, to be comfortable with that as well? But it also means we must be compassionate with each other and have empathy that we made the best decision we could with the information we had. So I always tell my students, look, you have to be 80 to 85% confident that the decision you made is the right decision 80 to 85% of the time, given that you have 80 to 85% of the information you need to make the decision. Because if you wait for 90, the decision's made for you. You don't have to do anything, or you miss the opportunity. So how do we say, get the information we need, make a decision that in the moment was the right decision, and don't beat me up when 2 months from now we get new information that said that wasn't a good decision. Well, I'm not omnipotent. If I was, with all due respect, I wouldn't be at McEwen in Canada, right? I'd be a multimillionaire somewhere on an island, my own island, thank you very much, in the Pacific Ocean with the sun. But anyway, so that's what I think, Ian. I think people have to figure out what's their value proposition, and that's how you explain that to your customer and your client. It's not the mode of delivery.
Thank you, and I agree. I don't think that the clients are the problem. I think it's business owners who don't understand what their actual service offering is and what people are actually paying for. I think that's a huge, people are not seeing it, and that's going to be the end of them, because they're not going to adapt to the new world, and it's just going to end poorly for those who are handing things out for free. So thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you. I see Charlene wrote in the chat here, and all I can say, Charlene, I feel you, goodness knows. But the challenge is I'm not a citizen, but those of us who live here and those of you who vote, right, Canadian citizens, the challenge is that we hold them accountable, so they're afraid. It's really fear. They're afraid to make decisions because when they make a bad one, we beat them up. Let's be honest. I do it as well, right? That was stupid. Why'd you do that? We beat them up. And so citizens also have to get a little bit more comfortable that they're humans. They're not omnipotent. And when they get together in a group, they don't want to make a big decision that's going to come back to haunt them, because everybody's thinking about the next election. How do I stay in power? They're not thinking about how do I use these 3.5 years to advance my community, my constituents, make their lives better, my municipality, whatever that is. That's not how they're thinking. They're literally thinking, how do I don't think they're consciously thinking this, but this is what it looks like to me. How do I make the least number of mistakes so I can be reelected for another 4 years? That's the problem, in my not so humble opinion. Anything? Oh, I think we're at time, eh?
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. Anybody? I have one question, Wanda. How do you think education has to change? We hear a lot of stories about people who didn't do particularly well at post-secondary, but they become quite successful.
Well, I think it's how you define success, first of all, right? It all depends on what success is. And if I may cite a fellow Canadian, Malcolm Gladwell, it's 10,000 hours, right? So I invite you to read Tipping Point, because he explains people like Bill Gates, right? Who happened to be at the right place at the right time and happened to look the right way and took advantage of situations. That's not normal, right? And so I think post-secondary and in particular has to identify what are the core competencies, not skills. We have a government now that is really focused on skills because they really are tied to places like NATE, which I love. We've let go of the vocations in the US, which is a big mistake. My son has a trade. But it has to be, it's the competency. And a competency isn't just, I know how to do this thing over and over and over and over and over again. A competency says, I can take what I've learned and apply it to this new issue in different ways and still come up with a legitimate solution to a problem I didn't know I was going to have. And it has to be about how do I leverage the knowledge I have to solve problems and think critically, but people use that term all the time. And by think critically, we mean, how do I begin to think about the world of work or solving problems and coming up with solutions? And I mean community issues, like how do we solve homelessness? How do we solve hunger? Like for real, right? We have enough food. How come it can't get to the right people? So we need to help focus on not these badges. I'm not a fan of that either, because all we're saying is, you know how to do that one thing. It's how do you group all those things together to move entities forward? That's what I want. How do we develop leaders? And again, it's back to us engaging with folks like you and saying, what do you think is going on in your industry? And what's coming down the path that you don't know how to deal with? And that requires what we call experiential learning, where we invite you into the classroom to share these issues. And then we put groups of students together and say, go figure out how to address that issue. And they'll be scared because they're like, I don't know how to address that. I don't know. Yeah, well, go figure it out. Because that's what you're going to be asked to do in the real world. That's what's going to add value, not these badges and these little skills. It's the competencies together. And then I think we have to, as I said earlier, we have to get people comfortable with working with each other, comfortable with disagreeing with respect and dignity. Disagreeing is important. I learned this very early in life. A washing machine is an agitator. It agitates to clean the clothes, right? Back in the day, you had that board. Again, some young people that have no clue what I'm talking about, but you had that board. You were literally scrubbing, right? Agitating to get the dirt out. So disagreement is important to come up with the best decisions. If you're in a group and everybody says, oh yeah, that works, that's not in your best interest. You need naysayers, but they have to learn how to do that with respect. And then they have to honor that other people have different perspectives and they need to be in the room. Look across Canada. This was in CTV a week ago. Almost all of the major companies in Canada, if you look at the senior leadership and the board, they're all European. They're all white. You're not making the best decisions because you're missing things that people who have different cultures and backgrounds see that you don't see, right? So those are the things I think we have to focus on in post-secondary.
Thank you.